Hello, everybody. Welcome to a joint presentation from 350 Contra Costa and Sustainable Contra Costa. Can you hear me all? Is that working out pretty well? Yes, okay, good. And I'm going to rename myself. I'm Jackie Garcia Mann, and we have Tyler, who's helping us from Sustainable Contra Costa, and he is our tech leader today. And then our speakers we're welcoming today, I'm going to say more about them in a little bit, are David Elliston and Sandy Emerson and Jim Thompson. Hello, everybody. Wow, we're getting a great turnout. Thank you so much for joining us on this really impressively stormy winter day. I have to say, maybe this is the kind of atmospheric river that seems scary, but maybe it will help end our drought. And it certainly saved us from our fire season, which I think we can all agree has officially ended with this big storm. So lots of good news with this torrential rain and wind we had today. I do want to take a minute to talk about Sustainability Week. So this is the first official Walnut Creek Sustainability Week, and we can thank Sustainable Walnut Creek with Bob Joe, who really organized this. And we have lots and lots of events happening all week, and I will post the link to Sustainability Week in the chat in a few minutes, and then we can you can look at that up later and see all the other events happening during the week. There's a Green Sofa Cinema Series movie on Wednesday night, which has a spot about vertical farming, which might be the food of the future. And we also have speakers from Climate Reality that are going to be happening all week to tell you more about climate change and what you can do, how you can take action. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Really great turnout for a rainy day. And we know that lots of people will be watching this also on YouTube Live. We have a live streaming service happening right now, and this will be available as a recording afterwards. And we'll post that on our 350 Contra Costa YouTube station. So that might take a few days to come out, but we will post the recording. So today we're talking about our money, and we have questions about if our money could be funding the climate crisis. And many
Oh, did we lose Jackie? Okay, she's frozen for everybody?
Yes, she's frozen.
Okay.
Yep, frozen.
Yeah, and now her video is black. So
Tyler, I think we can say that the answer to your question is yes. Our money is funding the climate crisis.
Yep. All right. Well, I feel like we will forge ahead, and Jackie will join us when she can. I don't have the bios to introduce the speakers, however, so I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself and just give a little background before you start your slides. But this is definitely a timely topic right now for us to be able to talk about how our savings, our banking, our investing can, or hopefully when we're all done today, cannot continue to fuel the climate crisis, and in fact can begin to work towards healing. So Jim, were you?
No, we're starting with David.
The one that's for, okay. All right, David.
All right, sure.
You ready to go?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
All righty, super. So I've been concerned about climate for a very long time, but I got really interested in divestment with the Dakota access pipeline protests 4 or 5 years ago, I guess in 2016. And I realized that my money was in these banks that were funding the pipeline. And as I got further into it, I realized that my 401k was also funding all of this fossil fuel mess. And so I got very interested in sustainable investing, and I've been working on that topic for a while. for myself and sharing with folks about that. So I'll be presenting on that. Let me hand it to Sandy.
I'm Sandy Emerson, and I'm with Fossil Free California. I got interested in divestment during the 2014 People's Climate March when it became increasingly clear that I had to do something to join this initiative to help save the planet. And I was so impressed with the Rockefeller Brothers fund divesting from fossil fuels. And I thought, what a great idea. I can do that. I can make my money speak better for me. So I've been involved with that ever since. And I love telling people about taking control of their money. I'll turn it over to Jim from this.
Thanks, Sandy and David. I'm going to say a little bit about myself and then go on and do my remarks, and then we'll come to Sandy and David. So 20 some years ago, I started a nonprofit called called Positive Coaching Alliance. The goal was to make youth sports producing better athletes and better people. The first workshop we did, we had 5 people in the room. 3 of them worked for Positive Coaching Alliance. When I stepped away from the CEO role a couple of years ago, we were doing 3,500 live workshops a year. That's about 10 a day across the country. I felt good about that. I felt proud of that. But then I took a sabbatical and wanted to learn about climate change. I knew it was bad. I didn't know quite how bad it was. One of the things I did is I got trained by Al Gore and the Climate Reality Project. So I like to say it was Al Gore and me and 1,200 of his closest friends for 3 days in the Minneapolis Convention Center. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Al Gore likes slides. In fact, he really likes slides. There were hundreds and hundreds of slides, but one of them grabbed my attention. James Hansen, who has been called the Paul Revere of the climate movement, was trying to explain how much heat humanity is putting into the earth every day. So imagine the energy given off by the explosion of an atomic bomb the size of the one the United States dropped on Hiroshima. Now, I wonder if you do something for me. When I say go, would you blink your eyes as fast as you can 10 times? Did you do that? Go. Thank you. If you continue doing that for 24 hours, plus a little bit more, you would come to 400,000 blinks. And that is the number that was on that slide. Every day, the equivalent of 400,000 atomic bombs is being released in terms of heat into the planet. Now, if we ever are able to get our arms around that number, it's really not much of a surprise that 68% of the wildlife on this planet has disappeared over the last 30 years. And it's actually worse than that, because that study came out in 2017. It doesn't include the somewhere between 1 billion and 2 billion animals that died in the wildfires in Australia. It doesn't include the 1 billion sea animals that died this summer in the heat dome in Pacific Northwest. We've got animals dying, we've got fires, floods, the permafrost, which needs a new name, is melting, and there's more carbon in the permafrost than all the carbon that humanity has released in history. If that continues to melt, it might be game over for humanity. Now, if we're going to fight climate change, and I think we absolutely need to, then I think it's really important that we fight for climate justice. And if we're going to fight for climate justice, we need to understand a really important concept, which is sacrifice zones. A sacrifice zone is a geographic area where the powers that be, the decision makers, don't care what happens. They don't care what happens to the land, the water, the air, the animals, the people. Let me give you a couple examples of what sacrifice zones are. first of all, Robert Bullard has been called the father of environmental justice. He did a study a while back. He noted that 25% of the people in Houston were Black, yet 82% of the solid waste facilities were sited in Black neighborhoods. So you got 25% of the people are Black, 82% of the polluting facilities are sited in their neighborhood. So accident, coincidence? No, that is a sacrifice zone. David, you mentioned the Dakota Access Pipeline. I grew up in North Dakota, so I followed that. The pipeline was originally routed near Bismarck, which is the capital. It's 97% white. And then magically, it got rerouted away from Bismarck to go directly under the water supply for the Standing Rock Indian Reservation tribe's water supply. All white Bismarck, gone. Indigenous people, Standing Rock Reservation, accident, coincidence? No, that is another sacrifice zone. Now, what the climate crisis is doing is it's turning the entire planet into a sacrifice zone. A couple of years ago, the air quality in the Bay Area was so bad that a friend of mine rented a place up in Tahoe for 2 weeks and took her family up there so the kids could be outside and breathe clean water. Clean air. Well, if you follow the fires in California this year, you probably know that the Lake Tahoe area came very close to burning up. What was a refuge is now part of a sacrifice zone. The two cities that I always thought would be great places to go as the world heated up were Portland, Oregon and Seattle, Washington. Rainy, cool, and yet the temperature in Portland this summer hit 116 degrees. 60 people died. The entire planet is becoming a sacrifice zone. But then the question is, what do we do? When I was in college, my roommate Craig bought an old Volkswagen bus. You may have seen those ones would have just all kinds of crazy paint on them. One day I was in the kitchen in the house we were renting, and Craig was in the backyard working on his Volkswagen. He started screaming, and I ran out to see what was going on. And I saw that his thumb was trapped between two pieces of steel. So I took all of my strength and tried to pry open those steel pieces, to no avail. One of our other roommates, David, came running out. Now, David grew up on a farm, and he understood machinery better than I did. He saw the leverage point, and he put his strength on that leverage point, and those pieces of steel opened up just enough so Craig could get his thumb out. I think this is a really helpful story for us as we think about what can we do about climate change, because there's a lot of things we can do that don't really respond to much. Where is the leverage? Well, let me tell you where the leverage is not. The leverage is not with the fossil fuel industry. There is just too much money. We cannot convince fossil fuel companies to do the right thing because they're staring at so much money. I read one study that said that there's about $27 trillion. Now, imagine how many hours you'd have to blink to get to 27 trillion. There's $27 trillion of assets, coal, oil, natural gas, which is really methane, tar sands, that are in the ground, but they are already on the balance sheets of the fossil fuel industries, companies. Now, I was not the best accounting student in my class at Stanford Business School, but I do understand the concept of stranded assets. If the fossil fuel industry is not able to get those assets out of the ground, sell them so they can be burned to further degrade the planet, they have to declare them as stranded assets. They have to write them off, and they're most likely going to go out of business. They will do anything they can to keep this game of them making money on the destruction of the planet going for as long as they can. So one of the things we know is that fossil fuel companies cannot do what they're doing without insurance, without investment, without bank loans. And while 100% of the business model of fossil fuel companies is destruction of the planet, the big climate bad banks The four worst are Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. The four of them alone have funded almost $1 trillion in climate destruction over just the past 5 years. But, and here's a really important but, only about 7.5% to 8% of their portfolio is in fossil fuels. Unlike the fossil fuel companies, banks could easily get out of funding the destruction of the planet. There's lots of things they could invest in, including things that would help the biosphere. So I want to give you two kinds of things that you can do that will contribute to leverage. The first has to do with aligning your money with your values, and the second has to do with your relationships. So if you are banking with a climate bad bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, then move your money. The organization I started, This Is What We Did, will help you move your money. You can go to thisiswhatwedid.org, look for actions, and click down on Move Your Money. There are all kinds of tools on that website that will help you get started in moving your money. If you want a coach, we will provide a coach for you to help you work through getting your money out of those climate bad banks, to align your money with your values. Now, maybe, and if four or more of you want, let's see, I'm not saying it right. If you know 4 other people that want to move their money and would come together in a cohort, we will offer a 4-week cohort program, 1 hour a week on Zoom, that will, by the end of the time, you will be able to be well on your way to getting your money out of there. Now, some of you may be way ahead of the game. You may have divested from these climate bad banks already. So then we are taking out a full-page ad in a major newspaper this fall and listing all the names of the people who have divested from these climate bad banks and the banks they've divested from. So go to our website, thisiswhatwedid.org, click on actions and go down to join our ad campaign. And it's very simple. You just sign up and put your name and the bank or banks that you've divested from. 2 ways that you can help align your money with your values. Let me talk just a second about our relationships. Everybody I know, literally everybody I know, knows someone in their network of friends and family who don't believe the climate crisis is really that big a deal and that we don't need to do something right now about it. A lot of people don't have conversations about climate change because they tend to go off the rail. Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist at Texas Tech and the Nature Conservancy, says, if we don't talk about something, we can't care about it. If we don't care about it, we don't act. Therefore, action starts with conversation. We will teach you how to have effective climate conversations so that they don't go off the rails, that you can actually strengthen your relationships with your friends and family while talking about a really important subject. In June, I was in northern Minnesota, protesting Enbridge Lines 3, which is delivering ultra dirty tar sands oil to the United States, going through the lands of the Indian reservations there. And one night I got arrested protesting. About 11 o'clock at night, and the officer who arrested me took me over and got my information. And I said, where am I going to go to jail? Because I know that area. I grew up in that area. There aren't any big cities. There's only small towns with small jails. And he said to me, we're going to cite and release you. If you come back tonight, we'll put you in jail, but we're going to cite and release you. We found out later that the reason they weren't arresting us was because they ran out of jail cells, which we took to be a small victory. But I decided in the 5-minute walk, he escorted me off the property, I decided to have a climate conversation with him. I found out that he was a game warden. He reads a lot about climate change and he's very concerned about it. I got new hearing aids a while back. I had a climate conversation with my audiologist. Turned out that she has a young child. She's very concerned about climate change. Got her signed up for our newsletter. I had some skin cancer taken off my arm a while back. I had a great conversation with the surgeon who did it. Found out that she had 2 daughters in high school. Signed her up for our newsletter. Having climate conversations is actually fun once you know how to do it. And we will teach you how to do it 3 weeks, 1 hour a week. If you want to be part of this, go to our website, thisiswhatwedid.org, click on actions, and then go down to effective climate conversations and sign up. So let me stop there and turn this over to Sandy. I'm eager to chat with you and have questions later. Sandy.
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to present, and I think share says here. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. In terms of money, it's a sensitive topic for Americans. It may be a sensitive topic in other cultures, but if you want a surefire way to stop a conversation mid-track, just ask someone, so where do you bank? And where you bank matters, and it's not that easy to emotionally prepare for shifting. There are so many reasons you might be banking where you bank. Your family banked there. It's the closest bank to your work. It's part of your worldview. But if you realize that the Wall Street banks take the money that you put into the bank and loan it up to 10 times to their values rather than your values, you see why it might be an idea to have another conversation about that. The Wall Street banks, particularly Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, the 4 largest banks in the US. Number 5 is US Bank, by the way. Their values are to make money for their shareholders, to make money for their executives, and they are gradually putting a light green wash on some of their pronouncements, but they are not stopping funding fossil fuels. Since the Paris Agreement in 2015, the big banks, 35 of the biggest banks, have put $38.1 trillion into fossil fuels. They had a slight maybe plateau right after Paris, but then it goes up and up and up. And they seem to compete with each other for taking on the riskiest possible loans, knowing full well that financing fossil fuels is destructive to the very future that they profess to support. As I mentioned in my introduction, I got inspired by the People's Climate Mobilization of 2014, and the divestment movement in turn is modeled on the anti-apartheid movement. At this point, investors representing assets worth $14.6 trillion have pledged to divest from fossil fuels. Faith-based organizations lead the charge. More and more philanthropies like the MacArthur Foundation recently, educational institutions like Harvard are pledging to divest from fossil fuels. Our state pension funds are laggards that only 12 or 13% of pension funds have pledged to divest. So our targets are the pension funds, primarily the state teachers' retirement system and the public employees' retirement system, STRS and PERS, we call them. Since 2019, we've been joined by youth as part of the climate strike movement. The global climate strike movement totally gets divesting from fossil fuels. It's their future. They are very sophisticated in making comments at investment committee meetings. They've appeared with us many times, and they are also taking not my dirty money pledges, never to bank with Wall Street banks. So they're just the heart and soul of this and much of the climate movement. As a result of youth activism, State Treasurer Fiona Ma has endorsed divestment, and Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurman has endorsed divestment. They sit on the board of Cal STIRS, and Fiona also sits on the board of Cal PERS. Why move your money? It says, it lines up a statement in your system because you know that at least the money that's under your personal control can be put in a place that doesn't support worldwide destruction. The bank exit movement started after the financial meltdown in 2008, when it became abundantly clear that banks had only the interests of their shareholders and executives at heart, and they caused such economic destruction. As David mentioned, the next big boost, there was also a boost during the Occupy movement. People left banks. And particularly during Dakota Access Pipeline, the group Mazaska Talks, an indigenous-led organization, got people to move their money out of banks. Up to $15 billion in individual deposits was moved out of the banks that were funding the Dakota Access Pipeline. They connected all the dots and showed which banks funded which project companies. Every year for the past 10 or 12, a coalition of nonprofits has published a banking report card called Banking on Climate Chaos. Most recently, used to be called Banking on Climate Change. But if you want to know if your bank is on the list of, say, the 35 dirtiest banks, or where exactly it ranks, or how much money it's put in, it's all in these wonderful reports. Most recently, these reports revealed which banks are funding Line 3 and the Enbridge Canadian company that's building that destructive pipeline. The four largest banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and Bank of America, control about 45% of 17.4 trillion in deposits. It's a really concentrated industry. These banks are also the top funders of fossil fuels. And you can remember, though, that it is your money and you can move it. When I was removing my money from Citibank, I knew all of this. I had the framework, I had the message, I was determined to do it. And still, when I typed out my little goodbye letter to Citibank and went into the branch with my letter for the teller, I felt surprisingly nervous. Was I going to get scolded? Who knew? But it was such a non-event. You hand your money in, they close your account, you walk out feeling really, really empowered. It's a wonderful thing to do. And I felt the same way when I cut up a couple of credit cards and like that. So as far as your self-empowerment, I recommend it. But then, of course, you need to find a place to put your money. And looking around the landscape of possibilities, credit unions are often a good bet. They're nonprofit organizations. They invest in houses and cars and small businesses and farming. And they will, take good care of your money. It depends on your requirements. There are also socially responsible banks, B Corp banks, community development financial institutions. There are online banks. There are brick and mortar banks. Credit unions, like most banks, will provide a network of ATMs where you can do your banking, and credit unions are part of a an organization so that you can bank at any credit union as if you were banking at your hometown branch. The Self-Help Federal Credit Union in Oakland is a very respectable place to put money, as is Beneficial State Bank, which is a B Corp. It's $1 billion bank. It's no longer a tiny bank. And someday we all, and cities and counties as well, will have a chance to use public banks where the money is invested in the community and retail banking is provided by a network of community banks. When you are cleaning up your personal money, you should take also a look at your credit cards. Your credit cards have a payment processor, Visa or MasterCard, and they are underwritten and in partnership with a bank. Very often it will be one of the big banks. You have to look a little bit to find a credit card that's supported by an independent bank like TCM Bank. And Beneficial State Bank now offers 3 flavors of credit cards. So if you bank with set up an account with a credit union, look for a credit card from where you have your new banking. Don't be taken in by REI's affinity card. It's supported by US Bank, the 5th largest bank in the States. There are lots of tools for finding a better bank. The Stop the Money Pipeline, Move Your Money page has a portal into bankforgood.org, so you can run that portal yourself. This is banklocal.info. You put in the name of your hometown or your zip code, and it will show you a list of local options ranked in order of their local impact. So this means that the smaller banks and credit unions are up at the top because they're more impactful to the community, and the Wall Street banks are at the bottom of the list. I recommend to you, if you're anywhere near San Francisco, to turn out next Friday for a youth-led action targeting Chase Bank and Wells Fargo at BlackRock headquarters. So they're targeting Biden, BlackRock, and banks in a wonderful corner of the financial district next Friday at 10:30. I will put all of these links in a PDF of my slide in the chat as soon as I'm finished so that you can get live links to all of these. Stop the Money Pipeline also has a customer-led campaign targeting Chase and Wells. And Breast Cancer Action is targeting the Susan G. Komen Foundation for doing business with Bank of America. So bank activism, it proceeds on the community and organizational level as well as the personal level. If you want more info, please be in touch. The greenamerica.org has a better banking set of pages. We have a Move Your Money section on our website, and you can send me an email. Thanks very much. And I'd like to turn it now over to David to talk about investments.
Thanks, Andy. Let me get my slides up. Okay, so let me know if there's a problem with the slides. I think you can see them.
Tyler, we need to change the spotlight. Okay. Well, you can go ahead and start, David, and we'll
Alrighty, I'll get going. So I am not a financial advisor. I am just a mentor, help people understand their investments, help people understand what's inside of it. I can't really tell you what to invest in, but just wanted to put that up there. I am a speaker for divestment. I'm an activist. I'm definitely not a financial professional. I'm actually a software engineer. So what did I want to share with you? Sustainable investing is really taken off in the last few years since I started getting interested in it. If we look at ESG assets or sustainable assets, there's a prediction that it'll reach about $50 trillion in the next few years, a third of global assets under management. And what does that mean under management? For people who don't have financial advisors, you are not under management. So actually under management, these assets under management tend to be the wealthier and wealthier people. Of course, many of us do have financial advisors, but wealthy people have been doing sustainable investing for a very long time, actually, because they had the ability to. And now it's become democratized and available to us. Why are people so excited about it? Well, it is doing really well, for one thing. 2020 was a bang up year for sustainable funds because fossil fuels took a real beating in part, and the tech stocks did well, but also companies that were more sustainable did better. Companies that had looked at their supply chains did better. And it turns out that sustainable investing demonstrated less risk. And this is actually an important thing to understand about investing, is that you're looking at risk versus return. If you invest in bonds, you expect less return for less risk. If you can get the same return or better return for less risk, you're actually getting benefit there. So sustainable investing is really hot. What is this though? ESG, sustainable SRI stuff. So you'll hear about ESG criteria. ESG is environment, social, and governance criteria on which you can measure companies. For instance, you can measure them on their carbon impact or the way in which they deploy clean technology or their pollution, things that are very interesting to folks in the environmental movement. But you can also look at them at a social level or a governance level. And these things are not just beneficial to society. It's been worked on for a few decades now, and now it's kind of understood that companies that exhibit better behaviors like this tend to do better in terms of their own performance. So at least we're not looking at the kind of negative or worse performance that I think was a characteristic of socially responsible funds maybe 20 or 30 years ago when they were expensive to operate. So that's ESG. Just as an example, a little data point, these things can have tangible impact on performance. So looking at some back testing, they found that, having a woman on the board produced much better results during that decade than having no woman on the board. And that's just one of hundreds of dimensions that they're now measuring companies on to determine how sustainable they are. So what I'm going to do in this talk is mostly show you tools online that you can use. But I do want to take you through this slide to try to explain what you can do from a sustainable investment perspective. I know it's a busy slide, but let me walk through it. So there are different sort of classes of sustainable investment. The first is exclusionary, where you want to filter out stocks based on industry. So this is very simple. You don't want to own guns. You don't want to own fossil fuels. And it's kind of the most basic socially responsible investing that emerged over the last few decades is exclusionary. And for instance, as an example, you can own the S&P 500 fossil fuel without fossil fuels. So it excludes about 36 stocks from the S&P 500. You can go buy that ticker, and it's a very easy trade. Say, I'm not going to buy the S&P 500 anymore. I'll buy it without fossil fuels. That's been available for a long time. But what gets kind of more interesting is when you integrate ESG criteria into your analysis. So here you're favoring good companies, you're underweighting or removing bad companies based on a lot of different dimensions that I showed you. And that is kind of a more advanced form of sustainable investing than the basic exclusionary investing. And when I show you the tools, you'll see what kind of benefits you're going to get in terms of the things you're avoiding and the things that you're getting into by going after sustainable investments. I'll just mention the other two. Sector investing is a focus on specific sectors like solar or wind. This is not what I'm talking about when I talk about sustainable investing, because that is a pretty high risk play to start going into individual investments and throw half your money into solar. It did really well last year, but it's been a bumpy ride. So sector investing is just where you might put some money in order to be more proactive about clean investing. And then impact investing is this kind of private investment that does real good. You won't see much of it in the markets where you actually stand to earn below market returns. So if that makes sense, I wanted to show you examples of these funds using the tool that I've used for years to understand what the fossil footprint of my mutual funds are. And we'll compare funds and put this tool into your hands when you leave so that you can go look at the fossil content of your own funds. We'll just click through on some of them. Let's start with the sort of most basic one, S&P 500, and we'll look at it using this tool called fossil free funds. I need to move this. Okay, fossil free funds, my favorite website, kind of rates fund providers on what their fossil content does. This one is the S&P 500, it gets a D because it has about 6.64% fossil fuels. Split into, and they kind of break this down into producers and consumers. The worst kind of things to own are the people who actually own the carbon underground. As folks may have mentioned, most of that's not going to get burned, so these companies are probably not valued correctly. But maybe in general, you'd like to avoid almost all of this stuff. If we look at the S&P 500 without fossil fuels, let me click that one up. Sorry. Click on this one. We're hoping to see a lot less investment. And here they've really reduced the producer side of fossil fuels. So you're at 0.05% carbon underground. There have been some improvements here. It is not the best fund in the world. It still contains a fair amount of fossil fuel production and consumption. But it was a little adjustment you could have made to get the carbon underground out of your portfolio, which makes a lot of sense from a financial perspective. So those are examples of exclusionary. Now I want to show you, I'm going to show you a fair number of Vanguard things because I think it's just a very common thing that people have out there. I'm not recommending Vanguard funds. I do use one of these, but I just want to show you because this is the most popular fund that I've ever seen in a 401k, which is the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index. It has almost all of the stocks in the United States in there, anything that's investable, and it gets a D because it has a wide variety of fossil fuels in it. Now, like most of the major fund companies, Vanguard has finally come out with its own ESG fund. And if we look at the ESG fund here, it contains, well, let's take a look. It gets a B. It contains actually less than 1% fossil fuel. It's gotten rid of pretty much all the producers. And you start to have to break open and look at who the consumers are because not every consumer is the worst one in the world. So there are, and if you're really serious, you can go take a look at these and see if these are bad companies or good companies, but not every electricity company is bad. So here, this is a very interesting fund because you're getting the Vanguard diversification, but you've really gotten rid of most of the fossil fuels. So that is exclusionary funds. And then if we look at integrated funds, I would just show you two good integrated funds, interesting integrated funds, which are using ESG criteria. And these are both global funds, meaning you could just own one fund and you would have international and domestic stock. And this is Vanguard's version of it. So it has a much shorter number of stocks in it. It doesn't have 5,000 stocks, it has like 30, and they've handpicked them. And there is one fossil-fired utility. It's this National Grid Plc, which I've kind of looked into. It's pretty good organization. So this is a nice clean fund that you could own that has almost none of the fossil fuels. However, it's still Vanguard. So if you really want to go into the traditional social responsible companies that did investment and actually go and do what is it called? When they go to the companies and try to push changes in the board, then this is an example of a fund. And Trillium is an example of one of the companies that sort of has traditionally really known about social responsible investing. So I don't want to take too much time. This is my favorite website, Fossil Free Funds. You can go in there if you go to the homepage of Fossil Free Funds and you can type in your fund right here and you can see what it has inside of it. Vanguard, and you'll presumably that'll get you to the fund that you're sitting on and holding. Yeah, I'm sure I had some other lovely slides to show, but I'm probably close to out of time. So I just in this slide deck is links to the fossil free funds. You can also go to their sister sites, weapons free funds, and so on to look at that content. We didn't have time to quite look at that. And then this chart, this fund list here is a list of all the typical, traditional, good, socially responsible fund companies and their funds. And that's where you could get less Vanguard and more boutique. You can take the pledge to remove your investments in fossil companies, just as you can take the pledge to get out of the banks that are funding fossil fuels. And then I will just mention about the 401k. You don't have many fund choices there, right? This is a bit of a problem. There's usually no socially responsible funds. You kind of have three things that you can do. You can choose the most sustainable funds based on maybe this website that looks at the fossil content. You can go to the brokerage where you can choose any fund in the world, but it's not that easy to use the brokerage in a 401k. And you can advocate and try to get your company to bring in a socially responsible fund. All right, let me end there and hand it back for.
Wow. Thank you, everyone. Boy, I know that is a lot of information, and we're going to get the spotlight figured out and go back to speaker view. Tyler, you got on that. But this just raises so many questions, and I see questions coming up in the chat, and we're going to try and get us all on the spotlight at once. We're going to try that, Tyler. And that way we can have a general discussion about these things. There we are. Hello, everybody. Wow, such great information. Thank you guys so much. And, you know, it's great to learn from your expertise and your past research. And it just shows that what a big, complicated area this is, right? There's so many different ways you need to consider your money in terms of your banking, in terms of your pension, in terms of your investment. And then there's CalSTRS and CalPERS, and there's a lot there to chew on. And it's a big process to go through this, to look at what you can do with your money and investments to make sure that they're invested in a way that that you find ethical and meet your own goals. So we had a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm not going to take them in order. And if other people, if you want to put questions in right now, I will take a look at that also. Okay, I'm going to start with an easy question. So what if you're someone who pays off your credit card every single month? Does it matter that you have a Wells Fargo or a Chase or Citibank credit card if you're paying it off every month? Are they getting to use your money in a way you wouldn't like? And I will start with Sandy. How about you?
The answer is yes, it matters, because Wells Fargo is receiving merchant fees. And if you pay a fee for the credit card at the beginning of every year, they're receiving that. So they're still using a lot of money in everything that Wells Fargo loans money to. Banks, you know, don't own shares, they own debt. And when you use your credit card and the merchant passes along that debt to the bank, it's used in everything that the bank loans money to. If you wanted remove your credit card, you have to either bank somewhere else or get one of these green credit cards, the rare green credit card, which is supported by a different bank.
And that's a great answer. Do you want to add anything to that, Jim or David?
I'll mention a caveat, which is that it's one thing not to use your Chase card, and it's another thing to cancel it. Now, it feels very good to cancel your Chase card, but you will also change your credit rating a little bit when you do that, because your credit rating in part is judged by how much outstanding credit you have versus how much you're using. So if you reduce your credit out there by getting rid of a card, it kind of affects your rating, but the new card will help. And I recommend Credit Karma as a free place. I'll put it in the chat as a free place to go look at your credit ratings. Of course, they'll try to sell you something, but.
And what about credit unions? Jim, I saw you posted something in the chat about this. Someone put a question. How do we know that credit unions are not investing in fossil fuels or unethical things as well? How do we know that credit unions are good?
Credit unions are good, and some of them are really good. In most cases, their charters may not even allow them to do it. If you go to the study that Sandy mentioned, Rainforest Action Network, it lists the funders of fossil fuel destruction of the planet. No credit unions are listed there. So I've never heard of a single credit union that is investing in fossil fuels. I would make a blanket statement that any credit union is better than one of the climate bad banks, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, or Bank of America. And I'm glad you said what you said, David, about our credit rating took a hit when I cut up my Chase credit card, which I had, I don't know, 30, maybe 40 years. So I think that's a place where if you're thinking about buying a house or making a big investment and your credit union is important there, you may want to wait. But
well, wait to cancel, but it totally doesn't matter to sit on a Chase card that you don't use, right? It doesn't help them for you to have a Chase card with them, and it doesn't hurt your credit then.
Yeah, part of what we're trying to do here, and I think Sandy mentioned that this was modeled on the South Africa divestment movement. One of the ways that you get bad actors who have a lot of power to do the right thing is you raise the cost to them. You make it so that it hurts. And that's one of the reasons we're taking out the full page ad with the names of people who have already divested. And Sandy and David and Jackie, if you haven't, please sign up for that. We want to the climate bad banks really are not that much different than the tobacco industry, but they're cruising along without getting that bad press, and let's see if we can make them hurt.
Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, the naming and shaming has become very effective as the climate activists have become more sophisticated with their technologies. Jamie Dimon looked out his window at some slogans that were projected on the building across from his apartment. And, it eventually, the shaming takes effect in some ways. With the divestment movement, we're also hoping to remove the social license for oil companies to do business, fossil fuel companies to do business. And when investors flee, credit becomes more expensive. There's a slogan in Stop the Money Pipeline that if you stop the flow of money, you can stop the flow of oil. And that is to some extent true, or at least you can make the returns. The reason banks continue loaning money to fossil fuel projects is because they can charge increasingly high interest rates. But when the assets become stranded, which is inevitable, it's going to be a train wreck. We're trying to do a managed decline rather than a Wile E. Coyote decline.
Okay, I'm going to read a complicated question here. And perhaps the question is just stay away from big banks, but it says there's a follow-up question about what percentage of a bank's, not a credit union's, funds go to fossil fuel investment. So if a small bank invests 10%, but Chase invests 7%, even though Chase's dollar amount would be larger, are they in fact a better choice? So that sounds to me like choosing between evils. David, do you have a comment on that?
Well, it's been a little while since I studied banks. What I recall, and I think Sandy mentioned, is that the banks have the ability to lend out something like 12 times as much money as they have in reserve. So if Chase has 7%, that means that it's a very strong multiple of what of leverage that the banks have, and it's the reason why public banking is kind of interesting. So esoteric comment.
Okay, does anyone else want to jump in on that one?
I think size matters personally rather than percentage. Chase Bank is a $3 trillion bank, and 7% of that is enough money to build several more pipelines, several more fossil-fired coal plants, a nuclear power plant if such is projected. So I say size matters.
And is there a difference between a public bank and a credit union? I think people would like to know a little bit more about that, because we see credit unions in our communities. But if you haven't banked there, people are unfamiliar with the local benefits to the community, as I know Sandy mentioned that. But I know a lot of people have always been with a big bank and they just don't understand what a bank like Beneficial Bank or Patelco might be doing in their own community. Someone want to address that?
Well, the community banks make a big point of explaining what they do in their communities. They make loans to small businesses. They support nonprofit organizations. You can imagine the pride with which they would explain what they're doing in the neighborhood, and they may make their community room available for community meetings. I mean, when you bank with a smaller bank and take the time, if you have the time to make a relationship, it starts to feel almost like a real human interaction. If you are looking for speed and efficiency, there are fossil-free online banks which will give you all the techno bells and whistles and all the benefits of just doing really speedy transactions along a spectrum of services. So you have, it depends on your style. I do like to go into a bank occasionally and look at a teller, or at least I used to before I was looking through a mask, and have a conversation about there's this, there's that, or at least an interaction.
And there was a really good question earlier, and I see people are giving great information in the chat, so I'm not going to address everything in there. But someone said, I feel trapped in my bank because of my mortgage. Any advice on how to remove myself from that situation? Jim, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, there are, and David or Sandy may know more about this than I do, but there are opportunities to refinance, and every once in a while offers come along that make it better for you. I don't think anybody is saying you should refinance in a way that puts you at risk, but to look for opportunities to do that. And there are among credit unions and small banks, there's a bank called Umpqua Bank, which is it's chartered in Oregon. I'd never heard of it before. And one of the people who was in our cohort for moving our money moved his mortgage, I think it was out of Bank of America, to Umpqua Bank. There are opportunities there, but you don't want to do it in a unsmart way.
Yeah, I think that's something, that this is a process. This isn't that, oh my gosh, tomorrow I have to change everything. I mean, some things are low-hanging fruit. Some things are easier than other things. Like, for instance, if you're going to change your credit card, you might get the new credit card first, because that might take a couple of months. And then you're going to move your auto pays over and make sure everything goes through. So it's not that you need to go cut your bank card tomorrow, but it does. I know you'd love that to happen, but people need to take care of their finances too. And it is a process. I know that when we applied for our Green America card with TCM Bank, it took quite a while to get the new card. It actually took them 3 months to process our card. And then we had some trouble getting it on auto pay, but it's all set up there. And I love that you mentioned Umpqua Bank, because I grew up on a ranch on the Umpqua River in Oregon. So everybody banked with Umpqua Bank there. other responses to this about opportunities to change things or the process of.
But Jackie, one of the reasons we started a cohort program is because I was talking, I used to be an administrator and a lecturer at the Stanford Business School. And I contacted one of my former students he's not a very senior person, but he's pretty high up in Wells Fargo. And he said something that just has stayed with me. And that is that our relationships with banks are sticky, and it's not accidental. The banks try to make it sticky. And one of the reasons we do the cohort model, or why we're now having a coach for people, is to help you do it. I was organizing protests outside of Wells Fargo branches. And my wife said to me, and we were handing out flyers telling people to divest from Wells Fargo. My wife said to me, we haven't done it yet. And when we started our first cohort, it was a Friday morning, about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I needed to get into my account from my employer so that I could switch that from going into Wells Fargo and going into the credit union we'd taken out. And I got into it, and it had a couple of security questions. The first one was, where did you meet your spouse? And the second one was, who is your favorite teacher? I said very confidently, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Polly Ames. And it came back to me, no, those are not the right answers. Now that is the moment where I would have said, I don't have time for this. I'll come back to it later. And I would not have come back later. The reason I stuck with it was because in 2 hours, I had a cohort meeting, and I had told people the week before I was going to get this done. So I stuck it out and got it done. We need encouragement, and we need a little bit of guidance. And that's again, why we have a coach for people and why we use the cohort model.
That's great. Coaching and follow through. And I like that. And having a community that you're doing that with. And, I've had people say to me in meetings like, well, I don't think I should divest from fossil fuels because, there's change from within. What about this idea we're going to change a company from within? And that, of course, is the argument that CalSTRS uses to not divest their pensions from fossil fuels. I think I saw some CEO statement saying they wanted to change from within. And someone put in something there about BlackRock throwing its shareholder weight toward voicing climate concerns at shareholder meetings. So in this case, I want to give David a little time to talk. And then I see Sandy chomping at the bit there because it's a big, the change from within. We, stick with us. We'll be better. I want to hear what you guys have to say about that.
I mean, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has written some very compelling letters, threatening letters to the CEOs of the world in the last year or two, saying, "Hey, this stuff really matters. We're going to start judging you all on your sustainability measures. We're going to expect accounting, and you're going to have to do something. In fact, you need to find purpose. You better be aligning your business with some goals that make sense." For the planet. So he's said some great things. I think they voted maybe a couple times against for some shareholder resolutions for climate and against what the board was saying, along with Vanguard. So there were a couple important votes like that. There have been thousands of other votes where they didn't side maybe correctly.
That's a good point, that they elevate some smaller actions, but there's lots and lots of other actions that are not aligned with that. I know BlackRock is divesting from coal, but they have lots of other gas pipeline projects.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Sandy.
BlackRock is where you hold your investments. They're not necessarily responsible for what all they hold, right? They serve investors. I wouldn't say they hold stuff.
Well, BlackRock, as the largest asset manager, along with Vanguard and State Street, they do make options available for certain investors in certain situations, but at the same time, their backbone indexes are fueling everything in the market, and I use that word advisedly, they are continuing to fuel Amazon destruction and deforestation and fossil fuels, and they always will, because they are making the market. So if they're also making noise over here about, yeah, you should do a little net zero and way out in the future in 2050, it's really, you cannot rely on that. They have enough heft to get rid of their fossil fuel investments, but they don't. They invest in everything.
And Jim?
Yeah. Let's put a little context in this. The human ability to live on this planet is being threatened. Our entire civilization is at risk. This is not just as important as divesting from South Africa, as important as racism is, as important as women's rights. All those things are important, but we're talking about the destruction of human civilization here. This is a really big deal. Now, I encourage everybody to get your money out of these climate bad banks. I know quite a few Stanford Business School people because I graduated there and I taught there for a while. I don't tell people who work at Wells Fargo to quit Wells Fargo. I tell them to work from within. And if you are working from within and you're not worried about getting fired, that's a really powerful place to be. If you're doing your job well and you're raising a ruckus, yeah, go for it. But let's just not forget what's at stake here. It's the future of humanity.
Before I get to Sandy's, the petition from Fossil Free California, someone says, E-Trade just got bought by Chase. So should I be dumping my investments held through E-Trade? I mean, yeah. Thank you, Jim, I'm going to say that too. Thank you, Jim, for bringing it back to this is a dire situation, right? I mean, the planet is in peril. We have no time to lose. So we've all got to think about where our investments are. I mean, if almost probably everybody here thinks of themselves as an environmentalist. And are we really environmentalists if we go out and buy our electric leaf blower, but we have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in the S&P 500, which includes fossil fuels? So we need to look at what is happening with our own money. Do you have any, David, on E-Trade, that question? Do you have any
don't liquidate all your investments. Move them. Host them someplace else.
Right.
Yeah, that would be nice. And Fidelity has a nice 2% cashback credit card you can use too if you switch to Fidelity. So there is plenty of places to host, Schwab, Fidelity, whatever. I don't know about the really boutique nice places.
Hey, Jackie, can there have been a number of comments about public banking?
Yeah, you want to address that? Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I'll say some things about it. I'm certainly not an expert in it. Again, I grew up in North Dakota, which has the only state bank. It wasn't an accident. The banks in North Dakota fought it like crazy. There was a movement, the farmer labor movement, that there's a book called The Prairie, something like Dakota Prairie Fire. People fought really hard to get that bank. And North Dakota has historically had a pretty good economy. A lot of people think that that's because they got fossil fuels, but Louisiana has fossil fuels. What a public bank does, what a state bank of North Dakota does, is it keeps lending when money gets tough. When money gets tough, the big banks sit on their funds. They don't loan monies to entrepreneurs who's trying to expand their business. They don't. A public bank can really be a game changer. And I'm really excited. I was very disappointed in Jerry Brown that he vetoed this a couple times, or at least once. And it's going to take a little while, but public banks, not so much for individuals, but for companies to be able to get money that they can use to fund the economy that's going to help our biosphere.
Yeah, individuals are very well served, frankly, by the credit unions and emerging community banks, but public banking is to serve your town, right? Your county, so that they don't have to go to Wells Fargo.
And Sandy has an action that she posted, a link to a petition. Sandy, you want to tell us about that? And I'm going to bring it down so it's in the chat. So this is something you guys can open and do right now. And we'll keep doing a few more Q&A for another 5 minutes, and then we'll close it up. So Sandy, go ahead.
There it is. This petition asks CalSTRS and CalPERS to divest from fossil fuels. We've recently expanded the terms of the petitions to include fossil-fired utilities and all of the fossil fuel sector, so that it's as wide-ranging as possible. The original Divest Invest pledge and some divestment campaigns target like just the top 200 oil, gas, and coal producers. So we are tackling the whole thing. CalPERS and CalSTRS reflect the whole market. CalPERS has about 7% invested in fossil fuels, and CalSTRS has a little less, like 6.5%. So they're just reflecting the whole market, and they only believe in change from within. They don't believe in selling shares in anything unless they're instructed to do so by the legislature. We're going after a statewide divestment bill because it's the only thing that's caused these funds to respond.
And tell me why, so everyone here understands why CalSTRS and CalPERS, what's special about them in the world of pension funds?
They're the first and second largest pension funds in the country. Together, they have about $500 billion in assets that they manage. And so again, size matters. If these public pension funds take a different investment approach and start to wind down their fossil fuel investments, it will really move the needle nationwide.
So if we've had all these universities divest, and we get CalSTRS and CalPERS to divest, and we have a few states that divested, right? Didn't New York, the state of New York, divest?
Yes.
Yes.
And the state of Maine has passed a law that pledges to divest as well.
Okay. And UC's pension fund, they divested, didn't they?
And the California State University. I mean, every diversion of money away from fossil fuel production could help reduce the supply of fossil fuels, because otherwise the business model is to constantly expand. I mean, it's cancer, it's capitalism, it's fossil fuel companies. Their model is growth at all costs.
And I just want to remind everyone here, I know we might think, oh, what do my couple dollars mean? But you are a customer, and we have an effect, right? We have this trickle up effect of telling our friends, telling our neighbors, telling our relatives, discouraging our friends. A friend recently said to me, oh, Jackie, you were on my shoulder. You were the angel telling me not to take that fossil fuel investment that somebody offered me. So again, it's one of those things to talk about, and our little actions together cumulatively can really, push the needle one way or the other. And Jim, I saw you had your hand up a minute there.
Yeah, a young man who volunteers with us, Daniel, said to me a while back, I got angry when I found out that the bank that I counted on to protect my money for my future is actually using my money to destroy my future. The Jim Collins, the business writer, came up with a metaphor of the flywheel. Flywheel is huge iron wheel, and you push on it and nothing seems to happen, and you push on it and nothing seems to happen, and eventually it starts to move a little bit, and eventually it gathers steam. I think it was 3 years ago that during we have the big game, Stanford Cal football. The game is Yale Harvard, and during the game at halftime, both Harvard and Yale students came out and refused to leave the field. It took them an hour to get them off there. The quarterback for Harvard put out a video saying he supported the students who were delaying the game. Now, it seemed like nothing was happening with Harvard. Everything they said, blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg says, but they just divested. And so I think we have to say, put your shoulder to that flywheel and do your little bit. And then I really want to say again, learn how to have climate conversations. Please go to our website, thisiswhatwedid.org, look for actions, and then click on effective climate conversation. It is amazing the impact you can have on the people around you. And I don't know if you guys know about the Overton window, but the Overton window is this conceptual space. If an issue is in the Overton window, the media talks about it and government tries to deal with it. And what Bernie Sanders did in his campaigns is he dragged issues into that were outside the Overton window. It doesn't matter how good your proposal is, if it's not in the Overton window, nobody's talking about it. So he got $15 an hour wage, for example. Florida voted for Trump in the last election. At the same time, they passed a $15 an hour minimum wage. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Oh no, that was a great closing statement from you, Jim. And Sandy, do you want to do a little closing statement, and then David, and then I'll wrap it up?
Well, I just wanted to echo that we all have the power to align our money with our values. It makes a difference in our system and in our neighborhoods. We can cause this industry and our future to move away from the brink, I believe, by our collective actions. David?
I didn't prepare any poetry. It was so empowering to leave the banks and then to work on sustainable investment and figure out, how to change that. When I realized that, like, by owning bonds in Exxon, I'm lending them my money, like, directly. It's crazy. It's not even like profiting from their stock. It's so. There's so much upside and happiness in getting control of your money and getting it and doing things that you want. So I encourage people to do that.
I think that's a great point too. Like, not only are we doing good for the earth and the future, but it makes us happy. We feel like good people when our actions and our morals align. That's a happy spot. So it's some work. It's a process. Again, go to Jim's website. This is what we did if you want to join a cohort. And we will make all of the resources available in a follow-up email for people to go and click on some of these. And I do hope you sign the petition at Fossil Free California. There were 37 of us on this call today, so that should be 37 more. Well, I guess a few of us already signed that, but that should be a bunch more ticks on that petition. And then talk about this with other people. That you now have some knowledge, you now have some tools, and start the conversations with your friends. You never know who you might influence, and that's a good feeling too. This was such a great talk for the beginning of Sustainability Week, and I think it was just a really great topic because it's something that's really often missed by people who consider themselves environmentally active or just very pro-environment, but they don't think about their own banking. And I know I have a little more work to do myself. We started this process. Several years ago, we told our investment advisor to divest us from fossil fuels, but whoops, we didn't realize our investments still contained Chase Bank and US Bank and big banks. And so there's another level of what we need to do now. And that's part of our continuing education and growth on this topic. So thank you all so much. And I hope you'll look up Sustainability Week and look at the other great talks all week long. And thank you so much to our speakers. You were wonderful and we really learned so much, and we got tools and empowerment, and now we're going to all go out and change our banks, right? All right, have a great week and stay safe. Hopefully this windy weather will be tapering off for any commutes.